This is the true story of the night my catamaran literally ripped itself in half 100 miles offshore, and what we did to survive it. It's taken me 5 years to talk about this, and for the first time on this channel, I'm sharing the entire story with you. On the night of December 13th, 2019, we left Fanning Island bound for Hawaii. And to properly explain why I picked that day, we're going to have to talk about how the weather systems work in the North Pacific, specifically in winter. So south of the equator, you have the southeast trades. That's what us sailors call the milk run. You can ride these winds nearly all the way across the entire Pacific Ocean. Above that belt of trade wind, you have the equator. And somewhere around that equator is the ITCZ, or the Intertropical Conversion Zone. You would probably know it as the doldrums. Once you pass the doldrums, then you get into the northeast trades. And if you keep going north around 35 or 40 degrees, that's a whole different animal. This is where you hit the westerlies. This is where big storms, big lows form over Russia. And then they roll across the Pacific and they hit the Aleutian Islands, which is the island chain right out of Alaska. That whole system of weather is called the Aleutian Low. So the Aleutian Low is this big, nasty weather system that lives in the North Pacific. And it lives there because of the interaction with the North Pacific High. Have you ever heard of the Great Garbage Patch? That is part of the system. And in between these two zones, whenever two systems meet like that, you get a constant battle of pressure systems. All right, this is where this story gets real, and I want to tell it like I'm sitting next to you. So no more heavy graphics, just me and you. So we left, and it was beautiful. It really wasn't even that bad, beating as hard as we could against those southeasterlies. But as soon as we got to the point where we needed to turn, that's when things started to change. As soon as we made it through the equator, we got hit by the strongest winds I've ever seen offshore. 65 knots. It was insane on a 7-ton cat. It just picked up the boat, overpowered the rudders, and made us start flying downwind at like 16, 18 knots. I remember being on top of the catamaran trying to wrestle the main down, and Kim and I looked at each other and just started laughing. And it was a crazy situation because if we had fallen off, there was no way you could turn around and go back to get the person. We had to get this main down. It was wild. So we got the main down and we ran with this storm for like half an hour or so, and it started to die down. It got down to about 35 knots and it never went below that for the rest of the trip. That was our wind speed. Not impossible conditions, but on a catamaran, the main driving sail is the mainsail. That's the rear one, the center one. On our catamaran, we only had 3 reefs in the mainsail. And at that wind speed, we really needed a 4th. So we tried to balance the boat by like taking down the main and using just the forward sail, and it just didn't work. It was making the autopilot work too hard because a little tiny rudder and a little tiny postage stamp of sail working against each other was just draining our batteries, and it was challenging there, but it wasn't really, really hard. So we ended up putting the mainsail up and just sailing a little faster, and then putting a drogue out the back to slow us down. So a drogue, in sailors' terms, is something you're dragging behind you to slow the boat down. In this case, we used our secondary anchor with a piece of anchor chain tied to a swivel, and then tied to a 300-foot line and just chucked it out the back and tied it onto the rear cleats. But it wasn't enough, so we put out a warp. So a warp is where you tie one line to both cleats in the rear of the cat and then chuck that in the water. So it's one piece of trailing line about 400 feet long. And believe it or not, it provides enough resistance where it significantly slows down the boat. And that worked. So at this point, we have a drogue, we have that warp, we have the main and the jib up. We're balanced well. The boat's trying to go a little faster than it needs to be, but it's being held back by all that drag. So at this point, I'm checking the weather, but I'm seeing that we got very unlucky and we're too committed to go back. Instead of one low rolling across the Aleutian low and into the Aleutians and feeding the trades and the trades slowing down afterwards, it was 3 in succession. We timed it perfectly for the perfect mother lode of storms to keep the waves and the wind at 35 knots for multiple weeks. So the waves started building and building and building. First they were 15 feet, then they were 20 feet, then they were 25 feet. And we were sailing upwind, which is not comfortable with 6-foot waves, let alone 25-foot waves. Then came the night the boat broke. We were almost there. It was the last night of a 1,500-mile passage, and the waves were insane. I've never seen waves like this. Only a couple times in my whole life have I seen waves even 25 feet. These were something else. So because it was so difficult to try to beat upwind against these huge waves, we were getting pushed more and more westerly. In retrospect, we probably could have made the east side of the Big Island, but we decided, because we didn't want to break the boat, let's just change to the west side. We'll just go to Kona instead of Hilo. That was mistake number 1. Maybe you know this already, but the Big Island of Hawaii, the one that's closest to the United States, the farthest east, is not just an island. It's a giant volcano. And if you measure that volcano from the ocean floor to the top of the island, it's bigger than Mount Everest. By a lot, by 15%. It's like 3 Empire State Buildings or 4 Eiffel Towers if you're European. It's by far the tallest mountain on Earth. Now picture all of that wave energy hitting the biggest mountain on the planet underwater. What it does is it creates chaos. Waves start refracting and doubling up and tripling up, and you get katabatic winds that come down off the mountain and just rip through. You get a big wind shadow in the back of it. And this is exactly what we unknowingly sailed into. These weren't just big waves. They were towering, confused walls of water that were invisible to us because it was at night until they hit us. And then one did. I didn't see this wave hit us. But what it felt like was it picked up the catamaran, maybe 20 or 30 feet, and then just dropped it. It was the weirdest sensation. We were in midair, and then boom, the catamaran just shuddered. I'll never forget that. So that one didn't break the boat, but immediately I jumped up and I ran outside and I grabbed the wheel. And just as I was turning us downwind to kind of head with the wind, it happened again. This one was unsurvivable for the boat. You know the sound when you put a piece of wood against a tree and it gets the ground and then you jump on it? It was like that, but times 100. So I ran back in the boat and I ran downstairs into the starboard hull where I thought I heard the noise come from. And at first I couldn't see what the problem was. And then my heart just sank. I ran back up and I told Kimmy, babe, this is bad. And I explained to her that the rear main beam had failed. And then like a zipper, boom, 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 all the stringers, the front main beam, the entire hull was gone. The only thing holding it on now was the deck on top. And eventually what's going to happen when that deck lets go, that hull is going to fill with water and the whole catamaran is going to flip over. I was 100% sure. I still am 100% sure that that's what would happen. But without skipping a beat, Kim says, "Can we just tie it together with ropes?" And my initial reaction was, no way, that will not work. Wait a minute. That may work. So we talked about it and talked about how we would do it. And she said, okay, so who's going in the water? And I said, absolutely not you. I'm doing it. It's my boat. I'm going to risk it. So keep in mind, we're still out in this crazy wind and waves. It's 25-foot waves breaking on the boat. The hull of the boat is cracked. The deck is open. There's water coming in. The bilge pumps are taking care of it for now, but it's like the worst conditions imaginable to be in the water. Pitch black. So my first idea was, what's sticking out under the boat that I can grab? Because the hull is super smooth except for the strut that holds the propeller shaft. My idea was to go down, grab that, wrap the line around it, tie a bowline, and then take it up to a winch. That proved a lot harder because the boat was now a bucking Bronco, and basically I had to hold on to that strut for my life and just ride this thing while I tried to tie off this rope. It took me forever, actually. It took me a long time, holding my breath. It was horrible. And if I would have let go or it slipped off, it would have come right down on top of me and killed me. So I finally got it, and we got it up to the winch. We pulled the starboard hull back together, and everything's fine. And we're like, oh my God, it's working. It's so much better. It's not moving around. And then that worked for like 2 minutes. And then boom, the strut broke. It's a solid bronze strut glassed into the boat, and it breaks. And not only does it break, but now it's pulling, and the hull is going out. So now it pulls on the rudder shaft or the propeller shaft, and it bent it. It turns out like 70 degrees. So, and I'm thinking the hull is not going to be able to take that. We're definitely going to sink now. So I run back inside, run downstairs, and look for all the water coming in, and there's nothing, which is a testament to Eric's foam. The whole boat's built out of Eric's foam, and it's the same foam that they build wind turbines out of. I can't believe that it took that. 1 inch of solid stainless steel rod bending 70 degrees. That's crazy. So at this point, there's nothing else under the boat that we can tie to. So my idea was to tie onto the midships cleat and to jump in the water, go under the boat, and then pass the rope up to Kimmy, and then put it through a block and put it back to a winch so it would pull the boat together like this. And then I could just do that from the aft cleat and the front cleat, and maybe that'll work. Thing is, I got to go in the water with this 7-ton bucking Bronco, swim underneath it in the pitch black, and not come up underneath it and die. So at this time in my life, I was spearfishing all the time. I could hold my breath for 3 minutes. I could get down to 110 feet free diving. I was confident. There was never a doubt in my mind that I wouldn't be able to do this. And my idea was that I was going to jump off the boat with this rope in my teeth, coil it up on the deck first, and then swim down 30 or 40 feet, and then just start swimming as far as I could until I ran out of breath, and then come up, or until the rope stopped. And so that's what I did. But I wasn't planning on the noise underwater. I was planning on maybe being able to hear the boat or something. It was impossible. Pitch black, really loud, super scary. My adrenaline was going crazy. It was very frightening, but I did it. I ended up coming up like 200 feet from the boat and having to swim back. I hand the line to Kim. She gets it to the block. She gets it to the winch. We pull it in, and it works. Then we do it 2 more times. So I've got one on the back, one on the middle, one on the front. I think we used the spinnaker halyard on the front. Boats tied together. So it's at this point that we called the Coast Guard over the VHF. And it's really amazing that they were even able to hear us. I mean, I didn't think they would come back to us because they were 170 miles away. I was in the military. I know where that base is. We were about 100 miles off of Kona. So we were not anywhere close to Oahu. But they heard us, and they got back to us, and it was so relieving to talk to somebody. And basically what we told them was, look, the boat's tied together. It's fine. We're okay. I just want you to know that we're drifting towards Japan. We don't have any power. We lost one of our engines. When the sun comes up, the solar panels should charge the batteries enough where we can start our engine and start making way towards probably Kona again. And they were like, okay, we're sending a helicopter. And we...
Hey, this is Coast Guard. Roger, that's a good comment. I don't understand. If we sent a helicopter to your position to hoist you off of your vessel, would you feel comfortable leaving the vessel behind? Over.
And we said, no, we don't want a helicopter. We're fine. we're going to be okay. Just if you don't hear from us, send someone for us. And they said, no, we're going to send someone for you now. And so they sent a cutter out. And mind you, this is December 23rd at this point. They send a cutter in this crazy weather with a skeleton crew because it's almost Christmas. And then mid-conversation, all the lines let go. Boom! We took a big wave and it comes down, breaks all the lines. And so I get back on the VHF and I say, hey, repairs have failed. I'll call you back. Now I got to go back in the water again. This time, instead of using the same lines that we had, the anchor lines and the sheets and whatever lines we had on the boat, I remembered that we had a half a roll of Dyneema. Now, Dyneema, if you don't know, is a high modulus plastic fiber that's pretty much the strongest fiber known to man. It's 30% stronger than steel for the same diameter, and I had used it for all the cabling that held up the mast. So I grab this roll and we have enough. And so I jump in with that. And it floats too, which is kind of cool and kind of not cool because it made it hard to get around. But we end up tying the whole boat together with that stuff. And this time it works. But have you ever seen the way that the military salvages big ships when they sink in a channel or something and they need to get this ship out of the way, but it weighs thousands and thousands of tons? They use a chain on kind of a big barge and they just go back and forth until they saw through this thing. That's exactly the same thing that was happening to us. So now I finally got the boat tied together and it's sawing itself in half. It was wild. So thank God I'm a cruiser. We've been out forever and I had like 100 feet of tubing. I get back in the water again. I put all this tubing on. We put the tubing on for chafe protection, and that helps a lot. It didn't solve the problem, as you can see here. It cut through a lot of the hull, but we didn't sink. Spoiler alert, we make it. So it's at this point now where we're drifting, we're tied together, and we're really not comfortable. And I remembered that there's a sea anchor in the lazarette. So a sea anchor is a parachute that you put out and you tie it to a really long line and you try to get it so it's in the second wave from where you're at. So it needs to be like 400 or 500 feet a line for this thing. So we put this thing out and it pulls the front of the boat into the wind and it keeps the waves from breaking on the boat and makes the motion so much better. I mean, it was night and day. Problem is, that only lasted for 10 minutes and then boom, we're back to sideways. We don't know what happened. I go up topside and I start pulling this thing in and it's heavy. It's like half deflated parachute, 400 feet of line. And I get this thing back and it's completely flipped onto itself. And I'm thinking, okay, it's pretty rough out here. It's probably just a one-time fluke thing. I didn't have it in the right spot or something. So I untangle it all. I get it all back out safely because that's dangerous just in and of itself. It goes taut. It pulls the boat around again. We're comfortable again. It's beautiful. I ended up doing that 4 times before I gave up. So now I've been in the water 4 times and I've pulled this parachute thing in 400 feet 4 times. So 1,600 feet with, a 1-ton Chevy pickup truck on the end of it. I'm beyond exhausted. I can't, I'm shivering. I remember just shivering and saying, Kim, you got to come here and warm me up, and us getting into recover and just kind of letting the boat do its thing. I was done. I'm glad that the ropes held because I don't think I could have gone in again. So I'm trying to think what time it was. It was probably like 5 a.m. The sun was just coming up. I was shivering. We tried to get some sleep. We ended up waiting until the sun came up, charged the batteries, and the engine started. And that made a huge difference. Once we put the nose into the waves and wind and started motoring towards Kona, it was way better. And we ended up motoring into that big lee that the island makes, and it was so much more comfortable. So by the time the cutter arrived, we were in a much better headspace because we had decided that night that we were getting off the boat. Like, we were done. I have never wanted to abandon ship before, ever. That night, if the cutter would have been there, we'd have abandoned the boat. But this was 20 hours later, And by the way, the cutter lost an engine on the way down because the seas were so rough. They had the crew get super sick. It was a skeleton crew because it was December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve. And they were amazing. They came and they transferred us fuel, and they had put out their rib, and we gave them our fuel tanks, and then they went back and filled them up, and they brought them back with little chem lights on them and tossed them back in the boat, and the waves were still pretty big, and they were kind of going crazy, and the guys were falling over and laughing, and I could tell like they were super excited to be helping out a sailor. It was a really cool experience. Thank you. If you guys ever are watching this channel, if you ever watch this, I owe you my life. I was beyond done. Seeing that cutter come into view and hearing your voices and knowing we had somebody to protect us if something had gone wrong, you don't even know how that feels to a sailor that's broken like that. And when we docked in Kona and I gave everybody hugs, I was hugging all of the coasties and I was crying, and it was super emotional for us because, you know, that night was harrowing, man. We almost died. I could have died every single time I went in the water. The boat could have flipped over. You guys saved us. Thank you. I never got a chance to properly thank you guys. If you're watching, I owe you my life. Every time I walk by someone in a Coast Guard uniform now, I stop and I shake their hands. Every time. I will never stop doing that. In the next video, we're going to talk about the lessons learned from this story. There's lots of them. Drogues, sea anchors, getting in the water, the gear I wish I would have had. This is all documented thoroughly in my book, Be the Captain. This is the book I wish I had 25 years ago. Thank you for watching. Much love. See you next time.